Today, the leadership team from the employee networking group Black at Abt will share our reflections on Black History Month. We have Chloe Green, Black at Abt's overall chair.
Hi, everyone.
Joanne Germain, activities chair.
Hey, everyone.
Robert Royal Nixon, our membership chair.
Hey.
And myself, Meg Thornton, communications chair. So Black at Abt strives to facilitate the success of Abt's Black employees by enriching our professional lives, creating connections, and promoting environments that welcome, value, and leverage our diversity while contributing to our communities. Black at Abt's mission is to cultivate Black leaders at Abt and beyond, empower the communities where we operate, and transform our respective fields to reflect the diversity of our members. We just closed out Black at Abt sponsored Black History Month here at Abt, and I wanted to gather us all together to reflect on the great events that we had, share insights and lessons learned, and discuss the past year's focus on equity, inclusion, and diversity, both Abt-wide and within Black at Abt. So let's go ahead and get started with our reflections on Black History Month events. Are there any insights, thoughts, or takeaways that we want to share?
Yeah, so I'll just start off by saying that Black History Month was amazing this year. Claps for us, we did such a good job. But I think it's also a credit to our planning committee and just staff here who really showed up and showed out at the events, particularly our speaker series. There was just such great attendance at all of the events. Dr. Kamara Jones in particular, who had almost 900 people sign on to hear her speak and to hear her message. And I think it's just indicative of this hunger and thirst at Abt, but I think also in our society to be having open and honest conversations about race, racism, anti-Blackness, how that shows up at Abt and again in our society, and the things that we can do to address that, coupled with learning more about the Black experience, the lived experiences of Black people, and honoring that in our work and just period in our lives, our humanity and lived experiences of Black people. And so I think for Abt, Black History Month just really showed us that people want to be having these conversations. They want opportunities for honest and open dialogue about race and racism, and want to understand how to better show up for their Black colleagues.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight from what you said, Chloe, was for the first time, it seems like we're having open, honest conversations about these things in a way that we never have before. And I'm just excited to see how we can keep moving this work forward. So that has been great to see. Mm-hmm. Any other reflections?
Well, I just wanted to jump in about us needing space for Black employees. We had game night at the top of the month. We played Black Card Revoked, and it was just really nice and relaxing just to take down that veil and just show our true selves. And I know it's easier said than done saying show up as your true self at work, be authentic, but sometimes the space just doesn't allow for it, or we don't feel fully comfortable. So giving us those moments just to be ourselves, personally, culturally, all those things, like it was just really nice. And I really appreciate everyone who showed up for our game night.
Yeah. And I think even having events like that game night, we get to show that just Black staff at Abt are not just one monolith. We have our own lived experiences, our own backgrounds. We have different culture. There are some similarities there, but a lot of differences to call out, lift up, and celebrate. So having that Black Card Revoked game night was amazing. I completely agree with you, Joanne. So knowing what we know now from planning Black History Month, all of the planning that went into getting the speakers, all of the events, what would you do the same or differently moving forward for next year? Because I think we have some big shoes to fill.
Well, for me, one of the things that I would say that I would do the same is including more people. I think that the help that we received for people who decided to participate was a huge help that went forward into planning everything and making sure everything moved as smoothly as it could. Um, I think that we should have more events specifically for Black staff. That way, we all can have different ways of connecting and finding these safe spaces for us to basically come together and enjoy.
I think one thing to piggyback off of that, Robert, start planning probably sooner now that we really have an idea of what we can accomplish within that month. Get more people involved. We had how many total events, Chloe? Do you know
I
off the
think it
top
was
of your head?
7 events
7,
total.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was, you know, a lot of the same people planning multiple events at the same time. So maybe a lesson learned is, you know, one person overseeing an event. And that's the one thing they're kind of focused on, would be one of the lessons that I would take away. Any others?
And I would just say, going back to the number of events, that moving forward, we probably want to have less events overall, because I think that, as you stated, Meg, like that's just a lot to manage. And I think particularly with the topics that we're addressing and the work that we're trying to do around a culture shift here at Abt, there's emotional labor that goes into that work as Black people who are organizing this, that you can't quantify, but needs to be accounted for. And so while it was so much fun organizing and pulling everything together, it is taxing emotionally, mentally, physically, to pull together a month-long roster of events that truly digs into the joy of our experiences, but also the pain of our experiences, the trauma that we've experienced. So I say less events that are even more powerful, but more manageable when it comes to our emotional labor.
Yeah, and that's a really great piece to just take a minute and reflect on. We have over 400 years of history in this country that we're bringing into our day-to-day lives. And so a lot of the work that we did that went into planning, there's that trauma, there's that emotion. And then at the end of the day, we have a job to do at Abt. And then there's the real world and what's going on currently in our society that we're bringing to these events. So it does take, or can take, a toll on us. So I think that is a really good piece to pause and just reflect on. Thank you. Any other lessons learned?
I think I just want to add that we do need to budget time and resources to planning Black History Month. It turned out to be a huge undertaking, not just emotionally, but just time-wise. It took so long, and I don't think people fully realize what that takes to provide them with such enriching programs. So I think in the future, we would want to simply give ourselves, a stronger budget, give ourselves some real true time that's dedicated to us so we can charge, because on top of our project work, we're doing this on the side, and this is our volunteer hours. And without our committee, this could not have been done, like, at all. There was just too much to do. And even with our committee, it was still us being pulled in all different directions. So I feel like to continue to have this, continue to have the quality, I feel like we as a company to recognize that this is important and that we should allot time and resources to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you think about everything that we just accomplished just this past month, next year it has to be done to the same scale or even better. So, we definitely need that time, that budget, the labor hours to put in the thought and get the planning going. Absolutely. So that actually just takes me to another piece that I wanted to touch on. And that's Abt's company-wide, our commitment to equity, inclusion, and diversity, and our anti-racism work. So I just wanted to touch on that and get some of your thoughts on, the beginning conversations that we're starting to have around that topic.
So I know right now we are beginning to have conversations on equity, diversity, and inclusion, company-wide. We are we have met with Kathleen as well as other departments inside the company to speak more about Black staff needing more opportunities to have these opportunities basically come from more equity and diversity within their departments and divisions.
Yeah, and that actually makes me think of the December CEO chat, where we had basically a whole hour committed to kind of level setting. What does equity mean to you? What does inclusion mean to you? What does diversity mean to you? And having our staff kind of give us their answers to those questions, and then our Abt leadership being able to tell us what that means to Abt. So beginning again to have those conversations to level set in a way that we've never had those conversations before, definitely very important.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's also movement to where we're starting to move beyond conversations and making commitments internally to advance on equity. We're in the middle of a strategic planning process at Abt, and equity is centered and rooted in that process. And through that process, at the last CEO chat last week, Kathleen announced that we're hiring a VP of Global Equity, and that we're also standing up a global equity team, which myself and a few of our other colleagues are a part of, to really lead the equity work that'll be happening across the company. And the reason why it is named a VP of Global Equity and the Global Equity team is because Abt is a global company. And also when it comes to anti-Black racism, we understand that that is a global issue, right? And of course, the equity team is working intersectionally. It's not just about anti-Black racism. It's about, anti-Asian racism and the many ways that racism, oppression shows up in our country and also globally. These are things that we're going to be addressing as a team and as a company. But I think that a lot of us know that, I at least believe, anti-Blackness is sort of central and core to disrupting and dismantling other systems of oppression. And so that it has been rooted in the work and the advancements that are being made. And so there is a commitment that's starting to show up through staff that is being brought on, and people like myself, again, who now through my new role has dedicated time to really commit myself fully to racial equity work. But, there's a lot to do, as we all know, in any company. A lot of work to do to truly get us to a place to where we're an anti-racism company.
Yeah, and I think one thing too that I would want to pull from what you just said, Chloe, it's important to begin those conversations, begin that level setting, but it's also important to take that next step into action, into actually doing that hard work. And so I think that what you just touched on is really important. Are there any other actions that we can think of that are currently happening?
I mean, generally, we can just talk about the recruitment of Black and other BIPOC and staffed. I know that they're working on it and trying to improve our recruitment strategies, but it's just important to always keep that in mind. And just to touch on Lauren Reese's talk about, truly hiring Black Americans in like an international development space. There are literally hurdles built into that recruitment that like prevent them from walking into those type of positions. So we can hire people in various different divisions, but we do have to look at like what hurdles are being put in front of Black and BIPOC people to prevent them from succeeding. Because you can say like, oh, we went to the HBCU, we did this, and like we posted all of these things. But at the end of the day, like what within our requirements are not beneficial or not targeted towards Black individuals, because our lived experience are very important for the different equity work that we plan on doing. And then our education might look different, or our experiences might look different. It's not as cut and dry, but these people are way more than qualified to fill these positions. It's just like we can't look at it through this cookie cutter lens. People are perfect fits, but they just may not look how we traditionally have recruited people in the past.
That's a really good point, Joanne, right? Because, we can think of recruitment from the pipeline of, we have this position that we need filled. So where is that requisition going, to the point of getting in the door for an interview and all those points that you were touching on? Where is that job requisition being posted? What's the language used on that job requisition? And there might be some language that would exclude Black people or other BIPOC people from, even thinking that they're qualified, when we know that they're more than qualified for that position. And then really getting into the door for the interview. Are the people that are interviewing this Black staff, or this potential Black staff or BIPOC staff, do they even look like them? So I think that's really important that you called out the different places along that pipeline that we need to look at and make changes. Absolutely. So what about our role, Black at Abt's role, with anti-racism work, equity, inclusion, and diversity? We've been an employee networking group for a year now, and I think in the past year, we first kicked off with George Floyd's murder, and jumped right into boots hit the ground, needing to get this work done, make our voices heard, allow for space for our Black membership to have their voices heard. Let's talk a little bit about what it is we've been doing.
Yeah, so I think that to touch on what Joanne was saying around the hiring and recruitment piece, a lot of the reasons behind why we formed as a group as a ENG is the retention piece. How do we create an environment at Abt that feels safe and welcoming to Black staff? And I think at the root of that is really interrogating the way that we look at diversity and equity and inclusion. And I think oftentimes, people look at it with this, metaphor of like a table. And so for me, diversity is really about like, who is at the table, looking around and ensuring that it's not just a bunch of white faces, that there's differences beyond race, though, that we're also thinking about ethnicity, nationality, language, all of these different things that are part of our identity, but are so central to enhancing our work and enhancing our experiences at Abt. And then inclusion, it's moving beyond who has a seat at the table to whose voice is really honored at the table, because you can have a seat, but nobody's listening to you, and nobody you don't even feel like you have the space to speak up and to say anything and to move things forward. And so really ensuring that people aren't just at the table, but they have room and space to speak. And then equity, I think, takes it to another level around like who is designing things that are happening at the table, who's leading in that space. What is the commitment to transformative change at that table? Like all of these different things. What does accountability look like to the people that are most impacted by the disparities and inequities? And how are you truly centering and leading with Black voices and doing that intersectionally. And so I think that a lot of the work that we've been doing as an ENG so far is lifting that up in the various spaces that we've been working in across divisions and departments, and also with working and collaborating with various initiatives, just truly centering the fact that there is a need to lead with Black voices and advocating also for other oppressed people who work at our company and the need to lead with their voices as well, because that has been such a void, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be filled.
Yeah. Let's actually go with that a little bit. I want to hear more about the need to highlight Black voices, lift up Black voices, our lived experiences. Any other thoughts surrounding that?
So our lived experiences are always necessary in everything that we do. And here with Black at Abt, we have come up with the Pathways professional development series that highlights the voices of our Black leadership here, and just to giving advice, not just to junior staff, but all who, you know, are trying to navigate this environment that's predominantly white, generally in our professional fields. So with Pathways, it's usually built on like a panel of Black leadership, and we just focus on different topics. The first one that we did back in September was mentorship versus sponsorship. And the one that we did for Black History Month was finding your voice and having your own type of agency over that voice. And it has just been, I wish it was longer than an hour, just the experiences that everyone has brought and all that they had to say in their career, you know, in Abt and before Abt. It's just, there's just so much to say, and there's so much advice that is so necessary just coming from their general lived experiences. And just one point that they made at our last event was the need to continue to mentor and help the next person get into that space, help the next person find their voice. It's always, you know, you're helping the next person get to where you are and lifting them up. And I feel like that it's so important for us to share our lived experiences and share our advice, because navigating this professional environment as a Black person is hard, and it's been hard. And as much as, you know, the climate has been changing, a lot has stayed the same. And there's so many different types of microaggressions that we face, and it's never easy to handle that. So having that person that has that experience can tell you what they've done, how they've, you know, decompressed in these escalated situations where someone said something super offensive, when someone touched their hair, when someone didn't understand that the traumas that we see every day affects us in our work. Just hearing someone else say that and validate your experiences are so important. And that's why I'm so happy that we have Pathways. It may be difficult to do sometimes and like find people to share their experiences, but when they do, it's always enriching. And it's also beneficial for our non-Black staff to see, like, we go through this, like this is what happens. You might think it's okay, but or it's not that big of a deal, but it affects us. And just having them being able to hear that is important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things, Joanne, that you touched on in that is creating a community, like a safe space for our Black staff to, like you said, have their voices heard, you know, share their lived experiences, give advice, because I went through something, let me tell you what I went through, so maybe you don't have to. Really, really important, really important. So the work continues. what do you see happening in the next year? We have our feet under us a little bit. We have an idea of what we're doing, how we're going to do it. What do you see the next year bringing? What do you see Black at Abt bringing for the next year?
So one thing I could say that I see us bringing more of is creating more safe spaces for our Black staff and Black employees. Um, Black at App has been like an ENG group for a year now, as you mentioned earlier, and now established. We could further meet the needs of the memberships, the people who join our communities.
Yeah, and I think just within the year that we've been an established group, that was one of the biggest takeaways, in that our Black staff needs space. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. And I would say that the next year is a continuation of what I feel we've already been doing, which is really driving a culture shift here at Abt. And as Joanne was saying, some things have changed, but not enough. We know there's a lot of work still to do. There's a lot of unlearning and learning that needs to take place here. And I think, as we all know, presently, our culture, our society is rooted in white supremacy. And there's a need for us to be constantly calling that out, naming that explicitly, because there's no other way for us to address it and dismantle it. And I think a real big piece that has to be addressed at Abt, but also just in our society, is this need to maintain white comfort, and people to deeply interrogate that and understand that white comfort and maintaining white comfort stalls the cultural shift that needs to take place. And we all participate in that because racism tells us that white people shouldn't necessarily have to sit in discomfort, that it is the emotional labor and burden for Black people, brown people, Indigenous people to carry. And so oftentimes Black, brown, and Indigenous people are in a position to where you want to call out the need to disrupt white comfort, but your whole lived experience has been about maintaining that and creating this false safety for white people. But then that keeps us from having real, honest, authentic conversations about the work that needs to be done. And it's damaging for everybody involved. Because what really goes along with that is, we've all heard it and have talked about it like white fragility, but really that is a myth. White fragility tells us and teaches us that white people are incapable of dealing with racism, addressing racism. And that's not true. And if white people believe that they're incapable, it fails to acknowledge the power that resides within white people to be anti-racist, to be a true ally, to move differently, do things differently, to really stand up and show up for your Black, brown, and Indigenous brothers and sisters, and for Black, brown, and Indigenous people to maintain that myth. It also keeps us in a position, a perpetual position of constantly experiencing racial trauma, taking on more emotional labor because we don't feel like white people are capable. So it is so important for us to name that white fragility is a myth, it's a delusion. And we all have the power to move this work forward. And it all requires all of us showing up in a different way and truly being committed to disrupting white supremacy to get us to a place where Abt is truly a safe and welcoming space for everyone, but also in the work that we're doing in the communities that we serve, that we're also moving that work forward to advance equitable outcomes and to also get our communities to a place to where they're equitable and they're safe and welcoming spaces for everyone. Because as we know, that's not the current situation at hand.
Yep.
A lot to do, but we're ready for it.
Yeah, no, it's a lot to do. Black at Abt is ready for it. I think the leadership at Abt is ready for it. Absolutely. So I want to thank you all for taking the time today to share your reflections on Black History Month, the work that we've been doing around equity, inclusion, and diversity. and the work that each of us does within, our day-to-day work at Abt. I think it's so important and so valuable. So thank you for making some time and space today to have this conversation. Any last thoughts?
It was fun as always, I love kicking it with y'all. Yay, Black and Abt leadership team.
All right, y'all. Happy Black History Month.
Yes.